Good morning, folks. Day 3 of week 7, Acts chapter 17. I hope you've had a chance to read it. It is just a description of Paul's. We're on his second missionary journey as he's traveling kind of through what is presently Eastern Europe, kind of that Greek area. And Paul first is in Thessalonica, and he is sharing about Jesus, and it says in verse 4, some of the Jews were persuaded. So Paul went to the synagogue and is preaching and teaching, and obviously there are many Gentiles that hang around there as well. And I don't totally understand. I did some reading on the synagogue, and it seemed to be a place of community gathering. But it says that some of the Jews were persuaded, as did a great many of the devout Greeks. So many of the Gentiles were persuaded as well. The Jews become jealous, and they want to arrest Paul and Silas, and they go to the house of Jason. Jason must have been the person keeping them and housing them, and they can't find Paul and Silas, so they take Jason out, and they end up having to pay some money, so they're set free. But Paul and Silas go on to Berea, and again in Berea it says many of the Jews believed. But the Jews from Thessalonica hear about this. They head over to Berea to cause trouble for Paul, but Paul leaves. They take him to the sea, and Silas and Timothy remain there, and Paul heads to Athens and is at it appears to be a very Greek city with lots of idols, and Paul meets at the Areopagus in verse 22, and again, this was more of a gathering place that they would use as a place it was on a hill, so they would do trials and public forums and things there. So Paul preaches to these Gentiles there, and I found it interesting that yes, he boldly proclaims the gospel to them. And yet he does it in a different way than he has when he's had at the synagogues. So his gospel message, the gospel doesn't change. His focus of the gospel changes. And he meets these people where they're at, and they talk about, I found an altar with an inscription to the unknown God. And Paul says that, hey, this God, this is who I am proclaiming to you, this unknown God. And then goes on to describe God as creator, God as provider in verse 25, God as our ruler in verses 26 and following, and actually quotes two poets in verses 28. So where if God or if Paul were meeting with the Jewish crew, he would stick straightly to the Old Testament. But here he meets the people where they're at and ties that into the gospel and concludes with God as Savior, as Jesus as Savior at the end. So I found it just interesting how Paul meets the people where they're at. And yes, boldly proclaims the gospel, but does it in terms that they would understand. If he had used strictly Old Testament stuff, like he did early in chapter 17, that it said it was necessary for Christ to suffer and rise from the dead, he reasoned with them from the scriptures. That would have meant nothing to these folks. But the fact that he met them and then tied Jesus to them, and the need for Jesus to them, I found very interesting. So people believed, joined them, and we will get into chapter 18 tomorrow. But throughout this chapter, it's, some believe, many believe, some believed. So we just see the growth of the church and the impact of Paul and the spread of the gospel through this second missionary journey. So I did link a map in my comments to our yesterday's video, so you can check out this. But yeah, Paul's kind of in that Eastern Europe area, and a very critical area of the Roman Empire. So again, I hope you're reading, and I pray that God is speaking to you as you open up the scriptures. And if you have questions, if you have comments, I'd love for you to leave that here in the comment section, and I'd love to hear what God's teaching you. Have a great day. God bless.